air is known as winnowing. For example, if in a plate we have a mixture of sand, sand we get in the beaches, in the river beds, and sand is mixed with dust, any dried dust or dried leaves, anything. Then how can we separate the sand and the dust? Here sand is the heavier particle and dust is the light weighted particle. So how can we separate them is, we have to take a stool and then we have to stand on the stool with the plate in our hand. The plate has a mixture of sand and dust. So what happens if we stand on a height with the plate in hand, if the wind is blowing, the wind will blow away the lighter particles which will fall at one end and the sand will fall at the other end. So standing on a high platform with the plate in hand, and then the plate has a mixture of dry sand, sawdust and powdered leaf. What is sawdust? Sawdust is nothing but with a saw blade we cut wood for the purpose of making furniture. When we are cutting wood with a saw blade, we get small pieces of wood. They are very small. That is nothing but sawdust and powdered leaf. So in a plate they had a mixture of sand, powdered leaf and sawdust. So sand was the heavier particle and sawdust and powdered leaf is the lighter weight particle. So standing on a stool with the mixture of all these things in a hand, with the plate containing all these things, then with the help of wind, when wind is blowing, the sawdust and the powdered leaves will fall to this end, whereas the sand, the heavier particle, will fall to this end. So this is one method by which light weighted and heavy weighted particles will be separated. And one more method is, farmers in a field, they after the harvesting, after the threshing, they get the grains, right? So then after in the threshing process, the paddy was separated from the stalks. But now in the winnowing, from the grains, the husk has to be separated. So in the winnowing process, the husk has to be separated from the grain. Here the husk is the lighter particle and grain is the heavier particle. So a grain of a wheat or rice will be covered with a brownish color, yellowish colored husk, right? That is a dried skin like thing. So when the plant is young, it will be greenish in color when the grain is with the stalk. But when the grain will be sun dried, this husk will become brownish in color after sun drying. So this husk lightweighted particle will be separated from the heavy seed of grain by the process of winnowing. So farmers separate husk, light-weighted particle, from the heavy seeds of grain by the process called winnowing. So in that stage, the husk will fall this side and the grains will fall this side. And later this husk, which falls off on one direction, will be used as a food for the cattle. So this method of separation is winnowing. So threshing is separating grains from the stalks, grains from the stalks. Then after we get the grains are separated by a process called winnowing. Separation of husk from the grain by process of wind is known as winnowing. So this was our threshing and winnowing. Next process of separation of substance is sieving. So in the process of sieving, if we want to make any dish with flour, let it be all-purpose flour, that is maida, or let it be gram flour, that is besan, or let it be wheat flour. To make any dish, first if there are one or two insects or say any impurity, what we do, we sieve the flour with a sieve by pouring the flour into the sieve. Sieve looks something like this. So it has small mesh like net-like structure. So suppose if you are baking a cake, then also you sieve the all-purpose flour, or that is maida. Sieving the flour incorporates air into the flour. That helps the cake to bake in a better way. So that is the reason for sieving the flour in baking purpose, because it incorporates air in it, right? So sieving allows the fine flour particles to pass through the sieve and bigger impurities to remain in the sieve. So suppose if you are having one or two insects in that flour, those will remove in this upper part and all the good part will pass through the sieve and the impurities will remain in the upper part. So sieving allows the flour particles to pass through the sieve and bigger impurities to remain in the sieve. Understood, right? The purpose of sieving to remove the impurities. So generally powder like particles are sieved. And then at construction sites also we see pebbles and stones are separated from the sand by sieving. So in construction sites, sieve will be like this. Here person will be standing and he will pour the sand. So this sand it will get filtered, leaving the stones and big small stones and pebbles. So this is also a type of sieve used at construction site, and this type of sieve is used as the kitchens. So sieving is used when components have two different sizes. So in the process of sand sieving also, the sand has different size, and the pebbles, the rocks, the stones have different size. And in sieving the flour also, the flour will have a thin powdery consistency size, whereas the impurities will be little bit larger in size. So this is the process of sieving. So impurities are removed from the flour by sieving. So fine flour particles will be filtered and the impurities will be left behind. Same way, fine sand particles will be filtered and the stones and the rocks will be left behind. So this is one method of separation called sieving. So the next method is sedimentation and decantation. So you know, we wash the dal, we wash the rice before cooking them, right? So what happens when we pour rice and we rub it with the hand? What happens? The rice will settle at the bottom and the water will settle at the top, and that water will become muddy in consistency or whitish in consistency because it carries the impurities, dust or any other dirt particles having in that dal. So when heavier components in a mixture settle down after water is added to it, the process is called sedimentation. So adding, you have taken 2 cups of rice in a beaker and you have added water to it. That means you are soaking the water. You are soaking the rice with water. In that situation, what happens? The rice settles to the bottom and water is added to it. So when heavier component in a mixture settles after water is added to it, the process is called decantation. And then when the water along with the dust is removed, that process is known as, when heavier components in a mixture settle down after water is added to it, the process is called sedimentation. So if you are taking a bowl of rice and you are adding water to it, what happens? The rice will settle at the bottom and water will float. So that process where rice settles at the bottom is called sedimentation. And after the rice settles down, the water will come up and the water will carry the impurities. So when the water along with the dust is removed, the process is known as decantation. So example, if you are washing the rice, you mix water with the rice. At that stage, the rice settles down. That is sedimentation, settling down. And upper you get milkish color, whitish colored water along with some impurities. Then you throw away that water. So that process is known as decantation. Rice settling down is sedimentation and removing the wastewater is decantation. So in washing rice, impurities get mixed with water, right? And float. Here water is acting as the light-weighted particle along with the dust. So light-weighted, impurities getting mixed with water and floating is the light-weighted particle. And rice settled down at the bottom. So rice is the heavy-weight particle here. So rice settling down at the bottom is sedimentation, and then the dirty water is removed along with the dust by a process called decantation. The process of throwing away that water along with the dust, the impurities which it is carrying, is decantation. So any substance when mixed together, heavy particle settles down and the upper particle floats along with the impurities. So the heavier particle setting down is sedimentation, and the remaining water which carries the impurities will be thrown away by a process called decantation. So same way, if in a glass of water you mix some oil, oil doesn't mix with water, right? Because oil is a heavy weighted particle and oil is a light weighted particle and milk is. Same way, when oil is mixed with a glass of water, so it doesn't mix. Why? Because the two have both things have different weights. The water is heavier and the oil is lighter in weight, and the consistency of those two things are different. So oil and water never mix because the weight of the water and the weight of the oil is different. Oil will always float on the top because oil is lighter in weight and water is heavier in weight. The density of water is more, the density of oil is less. So if you want to separate oil and water mixed in a glass, what we do? We just slant the glass, so that way the oil, the top floating oil will go into the other glass and the water content will still remain in this glass. So oil and water will be mixed in a glass, can be separated by decantation. So oil and water will be mixed like this. Water is heavier, right? So it will settle at the bottom and the oil will float here. And then when you slant this glass and pour it into another glass, only the oil part will go first. So that way here we are separating the oil from the water by a process called decantation. So this is the process, sedimentation and decantation.